The jet that has defined American air power for the last 2 decades is quietly being phased out, not because it failed, not because it was a bad design, but because the threat it was built to fight no longer looks the way it did when engineers first put pencil to paper in the 1990s. The F-35 Lightning II, the most expensive weapons program in human history, the stealth fighter that was supposed to rule the skies for 50 years, is already facing the beginning of its end, and the aircraft being built to replace it does not officially exist. There is no press release. There is no public rollout. The program has no name you are allowed to know. The jet has no image the government has confirmed. And yet inside the most classified corridors of the United States Air Force, inside the black budget lines that Congress approves without details, inside the hangars and wind tunnels and simulation labs of America's most advanced defense contractors, that aircraft is being built right now. This is the story of why the most capable fighter jet ever put into production is already being left behind. What the replacement is designed to do that the F-35 simply cannot, and what it tells us about the future of air warfare in a world that is changing faster than any weapons program can keep up with. If you are someone who believes the United States should always hold the edge in the sky, type dominance in the comments right now, because what you are about to hear is going to completely change how you think about air power. To understand why the F-35 is being replaced, you first have to understand what it was built to be. And that means going back to the early 1990s, to a world that looked very different from the one we live in today. The Cold War had just ended. The Soviet Union had collapsed. American air power had just demonstrated in Desert Storm what a technologically superior air force could do to a conventionally equipped enemy. The results were staggering. The United States and its coalition partners flew over 100,000 sorties. Coalition aircraft losses were minimal. Iraqi air defenses, despite being one of the most densely packed in the world, were systematically dismantled in days. The lesson that American planners took from Desert Storm was clear. Stealth plus precision equals dominance. The enemy could not shoot down what they could not see, and if you could see the target from a safe distance, you could destroy it without putting your aircraft or your pilot at serious risk. That thinking led directly to the Joint Strike Fighter program, which eventually became the F-35. The concept was ambitious and unprecedented. Build one aircraft that could serve 3 different branches of the military. The Air Force wanted a conventional takeoff and landing aircraft to replace the aging F-16 and A-10. The Navy wanted a carrier-based variant to replace the F-18. The Marine Corps wanted a short takeoff and vertical landing version to replace the Harrier. One platform, 3 variants, millions of shared parts, maximum cost savings through economies of scale. The stealth would make it invisible to enemy radar. The advanced sensors would let it see the enemy before the enemy could see it. The data fusion systems would give the pilot a complete picture of the battle space that no previous fighter had ever provided. On paper, it was revolutionary. In execution, it became something else entirely. The F-35 program officially began in 2001. The first flight of the F-35A happened in 2006. By the time it reached initial operational capability, with the Marine Corps in 2015 and the Air Force in 2016, it was already 14 years into development. The price tag had grown from an initial estimate of around $233 billion for the full program to what is now projected to exceed $1.7 trillion over the aircraft's full life cycle. That is trillion with a T. It is the most expensive weapons system ever built by any nation in the history of human warfare, and it still had problems. Software issues, weight problems, helmet-mounted display complications, structural cracks discovered in the airframe, oxygen supply failures. The gun on the F-35A, which was one of its most controversial design compromises, could not be fired accurately until years after the jet entered service. Critics called it a flying Swiss Army knife, a jet that tried to do everything and therefore did nothing perfectly. Supporters pointed out that its sensor fusion capabilities and stealth profile were unlike anything else in the sky. Both sides had valid points. But while that debate was playing out in Washington, and in defense publications, and in congressional budget hearings, the world that the F-35 was designed to operate in had fundamentally changed. Here is what the F-35 was not designed to fight. When Lockheed Martin's engineers were drawing up the Joint Strike Fighter in the 1990s, Chinese fifth-generation fighters did not exist. Russia's most advanced anti-aircraft missile systems were nowhere near as capable as they are today. The concept of a fully integrated, networked air defense system that could track and engage stealth aircraft was theoretical, not operational. The world in the mid-1990s was one where American air dominance was so overwhelming that the primary challenge was not surviving against a peer adversary. It was managing cost and maintaining a modern fleet. China was still flying Soviet-era aircraft. Russia's military had collapsed, along with its economy. No serious defense analyst, in 1995, was writing papers about how to fight a war against an adversary with both advanced stealth fighters and sophisticated long-range surface-to-air missile systems. That world did not exist. It does now. Today, China operates the J-20 Mighty Dragon, a genuine fifth-generation stealth fighter that is no longer a prototype or a test article. It is an operational service with the People's Liberation Army Air Force in numbers that are growing every year. China is developing the J-35, a carrier-based stealth fighter that mirrors the developmental path of the F-35 itself. Russia operates the Su-57 Felon, its own fifth-generation stealth aircraft, though production numbers remain limited due to economic constraints. But the aircraft are only part of the threat. The other part, in many ways the more dangerous part, is what is happening on the ground. Russia's S-400 and S-500 surface-to-air missile systems represent a generational leap in the ability to detect, track, and engage aircraft that were previously considered immune to ground-based threats. The S-400 can engage targets at ranges exceeding 400 kilometers and at altitudes from extremely low to over 30 kilometers. The radar systems associated with these missiles are specifically designed to detect low observable aircraft. China has deployed its own advanced long-range surface-to-air systems and has invested enormously in developing radar technology specifically intended to reduce the advantages of stealth. The era of near invulnerability that stealth aircraft enjoyed in the 1990s and early 2000s is over, not because stealth stopped working, but because the adversary finally had the time, the resources, and the motivation to develop countermeasures. And the F-35, for all of its capabilities, was fundamentally designed in a threat environment that no longer reflects reality. Here is the specific technical problem that haunts the F-35 in a modern high-end conflict. The F-35's stealth profile is optimized primarily against high-frequency radar bands, particularly X-band and S-band radar. These are the most common radar frequencies used by fire control systems, meaning the radars that guide missiles to their targets. Against those radars, the F-35's radar cross-section is remarkably small, but low-frequency radar systems, VHF and UHF band radars, are far better at detecting low observable aircraft. The physics of stealth technology make it very difficult to reduce an aircraft's radar cross-section against these lower frequency bands, while also maintaining an airframe that is practical to fly and maintain. Modern Russian and Chinese integrated air defense systems increasingly incorporate these lower frequency detection radars, specifically to provide early warning of stealth aircraft. They may not be able to precisely guide a missile to an F-35 using these radars alone, but they can detect its approximate location and vector higher frequency fire control radars or interceptor aircraft to that location. The F-35 stealth is still valuable. It is still a serious capability, but calling it invisible in a modern high-end threat environment would be dangerously incorrect, and the gap between what the F-35 stealth was designed to penetrate and what it now faces has been widening every year since the jet entered service. There is a second problem: speed and altitude. The F-35's maximum speed is approximately Mach 1.6. It is not a supercruise aircraft. It cannot sustain supersonic speed without using its afterburner, which dramatically increases fuel consumption and, critically, dramatically increases the aircraft's infrared signature, making it much easier to detect with passive infrared sensors. The F-22 Raptor, which was always intended to be the high-end air superiority complement to the F-35, can supercruise at over Mach 1.5 without afterburner. The F-35 simply cannot do that. In a within visual range dogfight Against a modern adversary aircraft, the F-35's performance is constrained by both its weight and its aerodynamic design, which reflects the compromises required to make one airframe work for three different branches with three very different operational requirements. The Marine Corps needed a vertical landing capability. That requirement drove design decisions that affect the entire family of aircraft, including the Air Force and Navy variants. The F-35 was never intended to be an air-to-air superiority fighter in the traditional sense. It was designed to find the enemy and kill it before the enemy ever knew it was there. That works brilliantly when your stealth is reliable and your sensors give you a decisive first-shot advantage. It becomes problematic in a contested environment where the enemy has made serious investments in detecting exactly that kind of aircraft. The third problem is perhaps the most operationally significant: range. In the Pacific Theater, which is increasingly the focus of American military planning for a potential conflict with China, distances are enormous. The distance from Guam to Taiwan is approximately 2,700 kilometers. The F-35's combat radius, meaning the distance it can fly to a target, engage, and return to base with a meaningful weapons load, is roughly 1,000 kilometers for the F-35A. The Navy's F-35C does somewhat better, but not dramatically so. That means in a Pacific conflict scenario, F-35s flying from bases that are survivable, meaning far enough from China to not be immediately destroyed by ballistic missiles at the start of a conflict, simply cannot reach many of the target areas without aerial refueling. And aerial refueling tankers are large, slow, and extremely vulnerable aircraft that would themselves be at severe risk in a high-end conflict against an adversary with long-range air-to-air missiles. The KC-46 tanker that the Air Force relies on is not a stealthy aircraft. It cannot operate in a contested environment. If the tankers cannot survive, the F-35s cannot get to the fight. This is not a theoretical concern. It is a central planning challenge that the United States Air Force has been grappling with openly in unclassified publications and congressional testimony. The F-35 is a brilliant aircraft for the threats and the operational environment of the early 2000s. Against the threat environment of 2030, 2035, and beyond, its limitations are real, they are significant, and they cannot be solved by software upgrades or new weapons. This is the context in which the program that does not officially exist was born. In 2018, the United States Air Force formally launched what it called the Next Generation Air Dominance Program, or NGAD. And from the very beginning, NGAD was different from every other major fighter program in American history. There was no competitive fly-off announced. There were no competing prototype photos leaked to aviation publications. There was no detailed requirements document released to the public. The Air Force made a deliberate, explicit decision to develop this aircraft with an unprecedented level of secrecy. The head of Air Force Acquisition told reporters in 2020 that the X-plane demonstrator for NAD had already flown. That single sentence was essentially all the official information released. No name, no photo, no contractor identified, no performance specifications, just confirmation that something had flown and that it was real. In the world of defense procurement, where major programs are typically followed obsessively by aviation journalists, defense analysts, congressional staffers, and foreign intelligence services, from the moment a contract is awarded, that level of secrecy is almost unheard of. It speaks to how seriously the Air Force is taking the threat environment, and how seriously it is taking the possibility that detailed knowledge of this aircraft's capabilities could undermine its operational effectiveness before it ever enters service. What do we actually know about NGAD? Less than the Air Force would like us to think we know, and more than the Air Force would officially admit. Here is what has been assembled from official statements, congressional testimony, unclassified defense documents, and the statements of senior Air Force officials speaking in careful, general terms. NGAD is not being designed as a single aircraft. It is being designed as part of what the Air Force calls a system of systems. The terminology being used is a crewed combat aircraft that operates as the centerpiece of a collaborative combat aircraft family, meaning it will work in coordination with unmanned autonomous wingmen that can take on the most dangerous missions, absorb enemy fire, carry additional weapons, and extend the sensor reach of the crewed aircraft. This is a fundamental shift in how air combat is conceptualized. The F-35 is a brilliant individual aircraft. NAD is being designed as the command node of a networked, partially unmanned combat team. The pilot in the NGAD aircraft will not just be flying their own jet. They will be managing a formation of autonomous aircraft, directing them to engage targets, suppressing enemy air defenses, and creating the conditions for the crewed aircraft to survive and complete its mission. Think of it less like a new fighter jet, and more like a new way of fighting in the air that happens to involve a fighter jet as its central element. The performance requirements for NOD, based on what has been discussed in general terms by Air Force leadership, are extraordinary. The aircraft is being designed for extreme range. Where the F-35 struggles to reach 1,000 kilometers in combat radius, NGAD is being discussed in terms that suggest a combat radius significantly greater than that, potentially in the range of 1,500 to 2,000 kilometers or beyond, specifically to address the tyranny of distance in the Pacific theater. The aircraft is expected to have supercruise capability, the ability to fly at supersonic speeds without afterburner, giving it both tactical speed advantages and a significantly reduced infrared signature compared to an afterburner-dependent aircraft. The stealth requirements are expected to substantially exceed those of the F-35, reflecting the evolved threat environment with advanced low-frequency radar detection systems. The aircraft will be designed from the beginning to integrate with the autonomous wingmen of the Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program, with those unmanned aircraft designed to extend its reach, absorb threats, and multiply its combat effectiveness. And it will be built around sensor fusion and data networking capabilities that make the F-35's already impressive systems look like the first generation that they are. Please take a moment right now to subscribe if you have not already. The vast majority of people watching this video are not subscribed. It takes 2 seconds, it costs nothing, and it is the only way to make sure you never miss coverage of the stories that the mainstream does not spend enough time on. Now let's keep going. The autonomous wingmen that will fly alongside NOD deserve their own detailed explanation because they are as important to understanding the future of air power as the crewed aircraft itself. The program developing these unmanned combat aircraft is called the Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program, and unlike NGAD, it has been discussed somewhat more openly. The concept is straightforward, even if the execution is breathtakingly complex. A crewed aircraft, whether it is the NAD or in earlier implementations, an F-35 or F-22, serves as the mission commander. It is accompanied by multiple unmanned aircraft that are not remotely piloted in the traditional sense, meaning a human operator sitting in a ground station somewhere does not manually control every movement. Instead, these aircraft operate with a significant degree of onboard autonomy, responding to broad mission direction from the crewed aircraft commander and making real-time tactical decisions using artificial intelligence. The advantages are significant and strategically transformative. Unmanned aircraft do not need life support systems, ejection seats, cockpit pressurization, or the dozens of other systems that exist solely to keep a human pilot alive and conscious at high altitude and high speed. Removing those systems saves enormous weight and volume, which can be redirected to fuel, weapons, or sensors. Unmanned aircraft can be designed to withstand G-forces that would incapacitate or kill a human pilot, enabling maneuver performance beyond anything a crewed aircraft can achieve. And critically, they are attritable. That is the term the Air Force uses. It means they are designed to be lost in combat without the catastrophic consequences of losing a trained pilot. Sending an unmanned aircraft into the most heavily defended airspace to suppress an enemy radar, knowing it may not come back, is an operationally acceptable decision. Sending a human pilot on that same mission with the same expected attrition rate is a decision that comes with enormous strategic, political, and human cost. This shift from purely crewed aviation to a crewed-uncrewed teaming model represents arguably the most fundamental change in air combat since the introduction of jet propulsion, and NGAD is being designed from the outset to operate as the center of that team. The financial reality of NGAD introduces a complication that has become one of the most contentious debates in American defense procurement. In 2024, the Air Force Secretary revealed that the current cost estimate for a single niche aircraft is over $300 million. To put that in context, an F-35A costs approximately $80 million. The F-22 Raptor, which was considered extraordinarily expensive when it was in production, cost roughly $150 million per aircraft in then-year dollars. Instead, at over $300 million per aircraft, is in a completely different financial category. At that price, the Air Force simply cannot buy the numbers of aircraft that traditional air campaign planning has been based on. The Cold War model of American air power was built on numerical strength as well as qualitative advantage. The United States maintained fleets of thousands of tactical aircraft because mass matters in warfare. You can lose 100 jets in the first week of a major conflict and still have the ability to keep fighting. If your entire high-end fleet is 100 aircraft at $300 million each, losing 30 of them in the opening phase of a conflict is a catastrophic blow from which recovery is measured in years, not weeks. This is the exact argument that led the Air Force to reconsider the NGAD acquisition strategy in 2024. Senior Air Force officials announced they were pausing the program to reassess the cost and acquisition approach, not canceling the underlying requirement, but reconsidering whether a single extremely expensive crewed aircraft is the right answer, or whether a different balance between fewer extremely capable crewed aircraft and larger numbers of cheaper autonomous wingmen makes more strategic sense. This debate is unresolved. It is ongoing, and its outcome will determine the shape of American air power for the next generation. What is not debated is the requirement itself. The United States Air Force needs something to replace the capabilities that aging F-22s and increasingly limited F-35s will be unable to provide in the threat environments of 2035 and beyond. Whatever form the answer takes, whether it is NGAD as originally conceived, a modified version, or a different balance between crewed and autonomous aircraft, the direction of travel is clear. The F-35 era is ending even as it reaches its peak production numbers. To understand just how dramatically the threat environment has changed, you need to spend some time understanding China's air power investment specifically, because China, not Russia, is the primary driver of American next-generation aviation requirements. Russia's military aviation remains capable and should not be dismissed, but Russia's economic constraints limit both production numbers and the pace of technological development. China faces no such constraints. China's defense budget has grown at approximately 7% per year for most of the last 2 decades. Its aviation industry has gone from producing unlicensed copies of Soviet-era designs to developing genuine fifth-generation stealth aircraft in roughly 20 years. That is a pace of technological development that has no historical parallel in the aviation industry of any nation. The J-20 entered operational service around 2017 and has been produced in numbers that the U.S. intelligence community estimates are significant and growing. Its exact radar cross-section and full capability envelope are not publicly known, but it is unambiguously a fifth-generation aircraft with genuine stealth characteristics, active electronically scanned array radar, and the ability to carry long-range air-to-air missiles in an internal weapons bay. China is developing the J-35, a carrier-based stealth aircraft that was recently revealed to be entering production for the People's Liberation Army Navy. The pace at which China has gone from its first carrier to its second to its third, and from no stealth aircraft to multiple operational stealth designs in both Air Force and naval variants, is something that American planners cannot afford to underestimate. But the aircraft are only the visible part of China's air power challenge to American dominance. The less visible, and arguably more dangerous part, is China's investment in anti-access and area denial capabilities. The strategic concept behind China's military buildup, particularly as it relates to Taiwan and the broader Western Pacific, is not to match American air power jet for jet. It is to make the operational environment so dangerous for American aircraft that the cost of intervention becomes unacceptably high. Dense networks of long-range surface-to-air missiles, over-the-horizon radar systems, large numbers of ballistic and cruise missiles targeted at American air bases throughout the region, and cyber and electronic warfare capabilities designed to degrade American command and control systems combine to create an environment that is qualitatively different from anything American forces have faced since the Cold War. In that environment, the F-35's 1,000-kilometer combat radius is a serious operational constraint. Its vulnerability to low-frequency radar detection in a sophisticated integrated air defense system matters. Its inability to supercruise matters. Its dependence on vulnerable tankers matters. None of these limitations mean the F-35 is useless. It remains one of the most capable combat aircraft in the world, and it will form the backbone of American tactical aviation for decades. But it was not designed to be the tip of the spear in a high-end conflict against a peer adversary with a mature anti-access capability. Something else has to be. Let's talk about what NOD, or whatever it ultimately becomes, actually looks like in an operational scenario. This is necessarily speculative because the program remains classified, but we can reason from the stated requirements and the known threat environment to construct a picture of how this aircraft would actually be used. Imagine a conflict scenario in the Western Pacific, sometime in the mid-2030s. American forces need to operate inside the range of Chinese integrated air defense systems to conduct strike missions against targets that are critical to the outcome of the conflict. The outer layer of Chinese air defense is built on long-range surface-to-air missile systems with radar coverage that extends hundreds of kilometers from the Chinese coast. Layered inside that are shorter-range, highly mobile systems that provide coverage against aircraft that have somehow penetrated the outer layer. Overlying all of it is a network of early warning radars, some of which are specifically designed to detect low observable aircraft at long range with reduced accuracy. In that environment, a package of F-35s with aerial refueling support faces serious challenges. The tankers cannot safely enter the threat envelope. The F-35s have limited range without the tankers. Their stealth is still valuable, but not invulnerable against the most advanced detection systems. And even if they reach the target area, they face the possibility of encountering J-20 interceptors that have been vectored to their approximate position by those low-frequency early warning radars. Now imagine the same scenario with an NGAD-centered force package. The NGAD aircraft, with its significantly greater range, does not require tanker support to reach the target area, or requires far less of it, keeping the tankers much further back in lower threat airspace. Its more advanced stealth makes detection by even the most sophisticated radar systems genuinely difficult. It is not flying alone. It is flying with a formation of autonomous collaborative combat aircraft, some of which are carrying electronic warfare payloads that are actively degrading the enemy's radar systems, some of which are carrying additional weapons to extend the NGAD's magazine depth, and some of which are flying ahead of the crewed aircraft into the most heavily defended airspace to draw out and engage enemy air defense systems. The NED pilot is managing this entire team, directing the autonomous aircraft based on the evolving tactical picture, engaging targets with long-range weapons from a position of far greater situational awareness and far greater survivability than any current aircraft can provide. The enemy does not know exactly where the NED is. They have a general sense from their long-range detection systems that something is out there, but their fire control radars cannot lock onto it with enough precision to guide a missile effectively. The autonomous wingmen are absorbing the attention and the missiles of the enemy air defenses, allowing the crewed aircraft to survive and complete the mission. That is the concept. Whether the technology can actually deliver on that concept at a cost the Air Force can afford in numbers that are operationally meaningful is the question that is still being answered in classified programs today. The question of what happens to the F-35 as NOD develops is important and is frequently misunderstood. The F-35 is not being cancelled. It is not being abandoned. The production line remains open and active. International partners including the United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Norway, the Netherlands, Italy, and others continue to buy F-35s and will continue to operate them for decades. The United States military itself will operate F-35s well into the 2060s and possibly beyond in certain configurations. What is changing is the F-35's role at the leading edge of American air power. As NGAD or its successor enters service, the F-35 transitions from the most capable aircraft in the fleet to a highly capable second tier, handling missions where the full performance of a next-generation aircraft is not required. operating in lower threat environments, providing the numerical mass that expensive Nagad aircraft cannot provide in sufficient quantities, and serving as the crewed coordinator for its own formations of autonomous wingmen as that technology matures. The F-35 will remain a critical and lethal combat aircraft for a very long time, but in the same way that the F-16 transitioned from the most advanced aircraft in the fleet when it entered service to a workhorse that complements more capable aircraft, the F-35 is beginning that same transition now, even as it is still in peak production. That is not a failure. That is how air power evolves. There is a human dimension to this story that deserves attention. The pilots who will fly NAD, assuming it enters service in a crewed configuration, will be doing something that no combat aviator in history has ever done. They will not just be flying a jet, they will be commanding a team of artificial intelligence-driven combat aircraft in real time, in the most dangerous airspace on Earth, while simultaneously managing their own aircraft's survival in a high-threat environment. The cognitive demands of that mission profile are genuinely unprecedented. Current research into crewed-uncrewed teaming, much of which is being conducted openly by the Air Force Research Laboratory and published in unclassified journals, points to the challenge of information overload. A pilot managing 3, 4, or 5 autonomous wingmen simultaneously, each of which is generating targeting data, sensor information, and status updates, while also flying their own aircraft at high speed in a hostile environment, is being asked to process more information and make more decisions per minute than current human performance research suggests is sustainable without significant cognitive support. This is one of the reasons artificial intelligence is not just a feature of Nagad, but is absolutely central to its concept. The AI does not just fly the unmanned aircraft, it filters and prioritizes information for the pilot. It presents decision options rather than raw data. It handles routine management of the autonomous wingmen, so the pilot can focus on the highest level decisions. The relationship between the human pilot and the artificial intelligence systems on Nagad will be unlike anything in current aviation. It is part of what makes the program so classified and so complex. The Air Force is not just developing a new airframe, it is developing a new model of human-machine combat collaboration that has profound implications far beyond aviation. The development process itself represents a departure from how American military aircraft have been built for decades. The F-35 was developed through what is called a traditional acquisition process. Requirements were defined, contracts were awarded, prototypes were built, years of testing followed. The program stretched across decades. Costs escalated. The gap between what was originally specified and what was actually delivered grew. The Air Force has stated explicitly that Nagad is being developed using a different approach, sometimes called a digital engineering model. The entire aircraft, every component, every system, every manufacturing process is modeled digitally before anything is built in the physical world. Testing happens virtually first. Problems are identified and solved in the digital model before they ever manifest in metal. The claimed advantages are enormous. Development time is compressed. Cost overruns are reduced because problems are found and fixed in software, which is far cheaper than finding them in a physical prototype. Manufacturing processes are optimized digitally before the first part is cut. Lockheed Martin has claimed that digital engineering reduced the development time for Nagad's demonstrator to a fraction of what traditional methods would have required. Whether those claims hold up at full-scale production remains to be proven. But the fact that a flying demonstrator was produced and reportedly flew before most of the defense journalism community even knew the program existed suggests that the digital engineering approach at least delivered significant speed advantages in the development phase. There is another dimension to Nagad that has received less public attention but may ultimately be more strategically significant than any of its performance characteristics. Exportability. The F-35 has been one of the most successful military export programs in American history. Over a dozen allied nations fly it or have committed to buying it. That export success has done something very important for American strategic interests. It has created a web of interoperability, shared maintenance infrastructure, shared spare parts, shared training pipelines, and shared intelligence integration between the United States and its closest allies. When a Norwegian F-35 and an American F-35 fly together, they are not just two aircraft that happen to be similar. They are platforms that can share targeting data seamlessly, that have the same tactical data links, that operate from the same base of technical knowledge. That integration has strategic value that goes well beyond the capabilities of the individual aircraft. KGAD, because of its extreme classification and its capabilities, will almost certainly not be exported to even the closest American allies in the near term. The United Kingdom, which is a partner on F-35, will not be getting NAD. Australia, which has committed enormous resources to F-35 and is one of America's most important Pacific allies, will not have NAD. Japan, which is actually developing its own next-generation fighter, called the FX, in partnership with the United Kingdom and Italy, is pursuing that program partly because it knows it will not have access to NAD. This creates a potential gap in alliance interoperability at the highest end of air combat capability. How that gap is managed, through what combination of shared data links, collaborative combat aircraft that allies might be able to access, and operational integration at the tactical level, is one of the more complex strategic questions that American planners are working through right now. Japan's FX program, which has its own parallel with the NGAD story, is worth a brief examination because it illustrates how the threat environment is driving next-generation fighter development, not just in America, but among its allies. Japan operates F-35s and will continue to, but the Japan Air Self-Defense Force has determined that for certain high-end missions, in the most threatening scenarios they face, they need a domestically developed or partner-developed aircraft that can operate at the cutting edge. The FX, also called the Global Combat Air Program, in its multinational form, with the United Kingdom and Italy, aims for a 2035 entry into service date. It incorporates similar concepts to NAD, including very low observability, long-range performance, and designed integration with autonomous wingmen. That three-nation program is developing its own version of the crewed-uncrewed teaming concept that NCAD is pioneering. The convergence of American, British, Japanese, and Italian thinking around the same fundamental concepts of sixth-generation air power, extreme stealth, crewed-uncrewed teaming, long-range, and artificial intelligence integration is not a coincidence. It reflects a common assessment of the threat environment and a common conclusion about what is required to meet it. One element of the NGAD story that deserves specific attention is what is happening with directed energy weapons, hypersonic capabilities, and the broader weapons integration picture for the next generation. The F-35 carries bombs and missiles in an internal weapons bay to preserve its stealth profile. It carries a gun. Its weapons are essentially evolutionary developments of the same categories of weapons that have been part of tactical aviation since the 1970s, though obviously much more capable versions. NGAD is expected to be designed from the beginning for a wider range of emerging weapons technologies. High-energy laser systems, while still too large and power-hungry for current operational aircraft, are advancing rapidly in the direction of airborne applications. An aircraft with NGAD's expected power generation capability and available volume could potentially be designed to accommodate a laser weapon system within its operational service life. Long-range hypersonic air-launched weapons, which can reach speeds of Mach 5 and above, and present tracking and intercept challenges that are genuinely beyond the capability of current air defense systems, are already in development and could be integrated on a platform with NAD's performance characteristics in ways that are not practical on the F-35. The weapons that an aircraft like NGAD eventually carries may be as revolutionary as the aircraft itself, and designing the platform to accommodate those weapons rather than retrofitting them onto an airframe that was not built for them is one of the key lessons learned from the F-35 program. The broader technology landscape that NGAD inhabits includes artificial intelligence developments that are moving faster than the acquisition cycle of any military program can track. The Air Force's central challenge is not just building an aircraft with the right performance numbers. It is building a platform that can evolve with artificial intelligence capabilities that will look very different in 2040 than they look today. The approach being taken, from what is publicly known, involves building the platform with processing power and data architecture that significantly exceed current requirements. creating headroom for AI capability upgrades that do not require fundamental redesign of the aircraft. It is the opposite of the F-35's experience, where the data architecture of the aircraft has sometimes constrained the pace of software upgrades and capability improvements. Whether that design philosophy succeeds in creating the kind of future-proof platform the Air Force envisions will depend in part on how rapidly AI develops, and in part on the discipline of the program to maintain the flexibility in the design rather than trading it away for short-term cost or performance gains, which is exactly what happened with the F-35 under the pressure of the acquisition process. There is one more dimension of this story that completes the picture, and it is the human cost of getting this wrong. The history of American air power includes moments where technological complacency, budget pressure, or optimistic threat assessments led to capability gaps with serious consequences. In the Korean War, American F-80s found themselves badly outmatched by Soviet-built MiG-15s in the early months of the conflict. The solution was rapidly fielding the F-86 Sabre, but American pilots died in that interval. In Vietnam, American fighters designed primarily for missile engagements without guns found themselves in close-range dogfights for which they were poorly prepared. The solution was the Top Gun program and design changes, but American pilots died in that interval too. The lesson of those historical episodes is that capability gaps do not announce themselves in advance. They reveal themselves in the opening phases of a conflict, when doctrine meets reality, and when the aircraft you plan to fight with encounters the aircraft you actually have to fight. The investment in NAD, whatever its ultimate cost, whatever controversies surround its development, is an investment in ensuring that if American pilots ever face a peer adversary in the air, they are not fighting last decade's airplane against this decade's threat. That is not an abstract concern. China's military planning explicitly envisions scenarios in which its air power would contest American operations in the Western Pacific. Russia's military doctrine explicitly includes air power as a key instrument of coercive pressure on NATO allies. The adversaries are not planning to fight old equipment. American pilots should not have to fly it. Here is where we are. The F-35, the most expensive weapons program in human history, a genuinely revolutionary aircraft that transformed American tactical aviation and was bought by a dozen allied nations, is being transitioned away from the leading edge of American air power before many of its pilots have finished their careers. Not because it failed, but because the world caught up, because adversaries that were not capable peers in the 1990s have become genuine challenges, because the threat environment of 2030 and 2040 demands capabilities that a 1990s design concept cannot fully provide, regardless of how many software updates are applied. And in its place, in programs so classified that their names are codes and their images do not exist in any public database, the United States Air Force is building what comes next: a crewed combat aircraft of extraordinary performance, designed for the specific threats that China and Russia have built, operating as the center of a team that includes artificial intelligence-driven unmanned wingmen, carrying weapons that in some cases do not yet exist in operational form, and built using digital engineering processes that are themselves revolutionary. We do not know exactly what it looks like. We do not know its official name. We do not know which contractor's logo is on the hangars where it is being built. We do not know its exact performance specifications, but we know it exists. We know it has flown. We know that the United States Air Force considers it essential to maintaining the edge in the sky that has been the foundation of American military power since World War II. And we know that the era of the F-35, as the pinnacle of American air power, is already ending, replaced by something that the world will not see until the day it matters most. The sky has never belonged permanently to any one nation, any one aircraft, or any one generation of technology. It has always belonged to whoever is willing to invest in the next thing before the current thing becomes insufficient. The United States built the F-86 while it was winning with propeller aircraft. It built the F-15 while the F-4 was still dominant. It built the F-22 and the F-35 while the F-15 and F-16 were still capable. At every step, the question was not whether the current aircraft was good enough for today. The question was whether it would be good enough for tomorrow. And today, While the F-35 production line is still running, and F-35 pilots are still training, and F-35s are still flying combat missions around the world, the answer to that question about tomorrow has already been given. Something new is coming. It does not have a public name. It does not have a public image. It does not officially exist, but it is real. It is flying, and when the day comes that it matters, it will be there. If you found this story worth your time, hit the like button and make sure you are subscribed. There is a lot more where this came from, and the stories of what is actually being built for the future of military power are some of the most important and most underreported stories in the world right now. Do not miss them.